Welcome to the Nerds and Friends podcast. My name is Josh Lindquist. Today I am joined by our astute nerd on the road, Nathan Childs, and my good
Oh,
friend
hello.
Will Shaw coming in from Denver. Everyone go follow him on @WillShawArt on Instagram and Twitter because he's an awesome artist. And we will be joined by the amazing Carrie Duvall when he is able to join us shortly. So today we're going to talk about, I don't know exactly where the conversation's going to go, but I guess I'll just introduce why I brought up this topic in the first place. So I was getting a lot of posts, not shared on my Facebook or any other social media accounts by friends, but I was just getting the apps giving me like recommended lots of memes and posts talking about the new Lord of the Rings of Power show, just bashing the shit out of it. And this is before the show came out. It came out tonight. I actually watched it just before we recorded this, so I'll kind of go on my quick tangent there. But this is before it came out, before anyone had seen it, before it had even premiered, and people were trashing it already. And it bothered me because I was like, why are you trashing a show you haven't seen yet? That's dumb. And then I thought about it because I was reading an article that the show was getting review bombed before it even came out. Like, people were giving it low ratings, and I was like, based on a trailer, like, and then I thought about what other properties have been review bombed, and the first examples that came to mind were Captain Marvel and She-Hulk. Those ones got review bombed too. And so it came to the conclusion that, oh, okay, the only people taking time to write bad reviews for a show they haven't watched must be like racist or misogynistic people. That was just kind of the conclusion I arrived at. And I kept getting these memes talking about how bad the show is, and they hadn't come out yet. So I posted a thing like 2 days ago where I was like, just basically saying what I just said, where I was like, this is dumb. Don't wait till you watch the show, and then if you have valid criticisms of it, then have valid criticisms. But and I got a lot of pushback, and that's what bothered me, is that a lot of people, whether people I know or people I didn't, were like, well, they were having a bunch of not cool arguments about, and it kept circling back. I was like, it doesn't seem like you're bothered by anything other than the diversity of the cast. Now, quick side note, having now seen the first 2 episodes of Rings of Power, it wasn't very diverse. I was pretty disappointed there. I was like, okay, like, the trailers really featured in on the characters more than they were represented in the actual show. So I was pretty disappointed there. And then I posted a review already about it. It just wasn't very well done. So I was disappointed on both fronts there. But I still think I'd like to explore the idea of, I mean, first off, I did a deep dive into like Tolkien's history and life story and different analysis of his work after we did our last podcast about talking about linguistics. And there was a pretty lengthy, interesting debate about like representations around race and diversity in Middle Earth. And it was pretty evenly split, where like a lot of people were like, well, it has themes of acceptance and different stuff like that. But then some people were saying that, they took issue with the fact that orcs are this irredeemable evil race, and kind of, drawing, how that dangerous parallels can be drawn from that. So I find the whole topic very interesting and very complicated. And so I wanted to hear what you guys have to say on that. I know it's a very broad topic, and so
yeah,
let's dive in.
Like, right off the bat, you kind of touched on something of like, if you're review bombing something that you haven't seen, because I think if you go back to like the Ghostbusters, which was
what, 2016, I think.
Yeah, it's something like that. The one
Yeah.
with the female lead cast, which it got tons of criticism even before it came out.
Right.
And
which, again, if people go and see it and they're like, oh, this just isn't good, fine.
Yeah.
That's valid, But if you haven't seen it and you're bothered by something in the trailer, what could it be? Because again, a trailer is rarely an accurate reflection of a movie's tone. It can kind of be in the ballpark of it, but if you watch a movie and you're like, that doesn't look like my cup of tea, okay. But if you're like, oh, this looks terrible, it's a broad assumption to make, and so I have to assume those people have some sort of agenda, and that bothers me.
Yeah, and I mean, even with movies that end up having great trailers, like the first Suicide Squad,
Yes.
where the trailer was so good they changed directors to reshoot the entire movie to try to make it more like the trailer, and that movie was terrible.
Yes. And
The
I think the
trailer was
reason it had such a bad taste going down is because you're like, oh, this could have been good. Like this had the
yeah.
ingredients of a good movie, but it was poorly done. And exactly as you said with that movie, the trailer came out. The company that edited that trailer, because it was at the time it was the most viewed trailer of all time, they said, "Wow, the way you guys use music and you edited the scenes, like it was really good." And so they said, "Why don't you do a cut of the movie, and we'll see how it goes?" And then the director David Ayer did a cut of the movie, and then instead of using one or the other, they just smashed the two of them together, which is why there are a couple scenes in that movie that the way it's edited with the music, I'm like, oh, that was cool. And then there's other scenes where the tone's just like way off, and I'm like, well, what the fuck am I watching? Like, it had the elements of a good movie, and then yeah, not good.
Yeah, but I think it's just bizarre going back to the Ghostbusters thing because like that movie was bad,
I
and
haven't seen it. Yeah, I'm not a
it
big Ghostbusters fan, just as a property
yeah, I'm
overall.
not a huge Ghostbusters fan either. I definitely like the original. Anything past there has been kind of mediocre. The one with the female cast, it was a bad movie. And it being a bad movie had nothing to do with the comedians who were starring in it. It was
Because they're all talented comedians who I've seen in other things, and I've seen them knock it out of the park. So it had to be the writing and directing, and not them, and not their performance.
yeah, it was absolutely the writing was bad. The like the movie in general, it was like you could tell that this was not a passion project. This is a we're going to make money on this, and it's really a shame because like what it kind of ended up being kind of pushed on the internet was this narrative of misogyny that ended up getting produced because it was this female fronted film that was already getting backlash for the casting choice before it even came out. And then it being bad on top of that just kind of perpetuated that line of thinking, unfortunately.
Yeah.
In and I think in a lot of ways we saw the same thing with like the new Star Wars. We've seen the same thing with I'm totally spacing on other properties.
Captain Marvel, She-Hulk.
Captain Marvel, thank you.
Yeah. Black Widow,
Um,
I think, got some flack too. Basically, every female-led Marvel project so far.
yeah, which in honestly with Captain Marvel, if anything,
I thought Captain Marvel was a great movie. I loved it.
yeah, it was a great movie.
She-Hulk, I've
Honestly,
only seen the first two episodes. The first one was not great, but the second episode was fine. I'm like, cool, I'm invested in the show now. So
yeah, I haven't uh watched She-Hulk yet because the advertising has been kind of
the advertising was poor. And honestly, the first reason I watch it is because one of my buddies is an actor in the show. His character hasn't showed up yet. I don't know what episodes he's in, but I was like, well, I like Marvel and I want to see my buddy. You know, it's like his big break. So I'm like, that's fucking awesome for him. And so I watched the first episode and I was like, it was bad writing, and it was just kind of campy and didn't really go anywhere. They had a few good moments, but I was like, 2 out of 10, like not great. But then because I wanted to see my buddy, I watched the second episode, and I'm really glad I did because the second episode was like, again, it was kind of like they got all the exposition out of the way in the first episode, which is why it sucked. So in the second episode, they're like, we're just going to start moving forward with the story and characters, and I was like, oh, it's pretty good actually. So
okay.
but I posted that. I said, hey, She-Hulk episode 2 is way better than the first. Glad I watched it. Can't wait to see where the show goes. And someone commented, they're like, oh, I think it's feminist propaganda. And I was like, fuck you. Why? Because it happens to have a female lead character.
Yeah, and I find that absolutely bizarre that it ends up being like that a lot of these properties end up being called female propaganda or like part of the LGBT agenda or whatever other type of nonsense thought terminating cliche that can be thought up by neckbeards on the internet. And I say that
I should have shaved my neck more before I got on. No.
I say that with full level of self-awareness as we're a bunch of neckbeards on the internet talking about this exact topic. But the thing with that is that when you start, I'm trying to let me.
Well, can I chime in with a quick thing? Because this was a comment I got, because I posted that thing about the Rings of Power on all of my different social media accounts. And on one, someone reached out to me. Actually, I got the same message a couple of times. They're like, "Well, it's not the fact that it's diverse; it's that the diversity is being forced upon us, and they care more about messaging than the actual story." And I was like, "What do you mean by messaging? Inclusiveness?" Like, but then I thought about it too, and I was like, "You know what? If Amazon was trying to push inclusiveness, I'd be on board, but they're not. It's fucking Amazon. They want to make money. There's no agenda. There's no morals. They're just like, how can we make this the most inclusive for the most amount of people so that we can get our payday? So it's neither good or bad. It's just like, it's just about money. Like there's not some cabal of people sitting around in Hollywood like we need to push an agenda. It's a bunch of people trying to make money and a bunch of artists, you know.
Thank you. And you actually reminded me of where I was going before I derailed myself on that thought train. Of the companies that are making these, they're not pushing any agenda. They do have an agenda. Their agenda is to make money.
Yes.
And they are pushing these properties because there is an audience for them, because they have determined that this is what's going to be profitable. And so by the time you get to the point where I don't like the fact that there is a black person or a woman, or that the Prey movie has Native Americans or whatever other, you've already lost the fight, because the company has made the calculation that the people that are going to watch this are going to be more profitable than your dumbass boycotting it, essentially.
And if anything, they're probably getting a little bit of like all the negative press is making the people who aren't fucking racist assholes go, oh, I want to watch this more now. It's almost free advertising in a sense, you know?
And it's very, very much in that same vein as like Nike when they endorsed Colin Kaepernick, where there was like a huge, like, or it wasn't really a huge pushback, but it was a loud pushback.
And that's, I'm glad you made that distinction, because again, I don't think it's most people. I think it's just a loud, obnoxious, fucking idiotic, small group of people that are pushing this.
Honestly, that's exactly what it is. It's a small group of people that are in their conservative red-pilled echo chamber on Twitter, who are having trouble getting out of those very insular communities, who they're only speaking to other people of that similar mindset, and so they think that this is the pervasive idea and that everybody agrees with them. And I mean, we're all in our years old, and
yes, you're correct.
Like, we've all been 16. Like, we know what it's like to go through like having that thought of like, oh well, everybody really thinks this, or it could just be me.
No, totally.
I've edgy teenagers.
No, my outlook growing up. Well, first off, I was homeschooled, so my outlook was like, and then I went to a Christian private school for middle school, so, and then I went to high school in Colorado Springs, and then when I went to college, my outlook started to broaden. And yes, no, up until college though, I was very conservative and closed-minded. Absolutely, yeah. And then I went on to the real world, and I was like, oh, like. Yeah, I see.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not always just being closed-minded either. I mean, it's easy to write off a lot of these assholes as just being closed-minded pricks, but in honesty, when you're in an insular community like that, it can be easy to forget that there is an outside world.
True.
But it when you are looking at this from a business level, Disney and I don't remember who's making the Rings of Power. I know it's
Amazon.
on Amazon, but
no, Amazon produced it also.
they produced. Oh,
It's the most expensive show ever made, and they hired writers who clearly forgot how to write TV shows, because I was not impressed with the writing. Yeah, and again, the thing that bothered me was like, they were advertising it as this really diverse rebranding, and people were like, well, you can't have black elves and black dwarves, and I was like, fuck you. But literally in the first 2 episodes of every Middle Earth race, elves, dwarves, men, and hobbits, they had one non-white character that had like that was a supporting character. It was like they checked off boxes and they were like, oh, we did it. And I'm like, dude, I wanted like a third of the elves to be black, and like I wanted to see Hispanic and Asian elves. Like, what are you doing? Like, it felt very, because now that I'm an adult who's seen more of the world and stuff, like when I go back and watch the Lord of the Rings movies, which I still love, they're great movies. The only issue I have with them is that I'm like, everyone's white. This is lame.
Mhm.
And they had a chance to fix that, and so far they didn't. They just did a really lackluster job. So I was very disappointed.
And I mean, there is a time and a place to get somebody who has a specific look for a specific role. But when your role is elves, there's no like, there is no color or skin color that elves have, because elves are fictional.
Yes.
And you can like, I'll be honest, and I'm about to get stabbed by in the back by like 3/4 of the podcast here. But Tolkien wrote one good book and one great book.
And expand on this.
That's it. He wrote The Lord of the Rings, which is a good book. And I'll be honest, like, it's not my favorite book. I'm not the biggest of Tolkien fans. It's an okay book.
It's valid. I respect that.
It's okay. It had a huge impact on the fantasy world. There is no doubting that. The Hobbit is actually a pretty great book. And I think it's actually better than The Lord of the Rings by fact that it is a shorter and more digestible version of it.
That's valid.
For a specifically like a younger audience, whereas it has the fantasy that you get in The Lord of the Rings in a very digestible package, and it is much more accessible, and it's much more fun. The Lord of the Rings is interesting, but it's not a fun read. It's not an easy read. And the Silmarillion is incoherent.
I liked the Silmarillion.
I'm sure you did. You speak Elvish.
Yeah, well, I'm rusty, but yes. Yes. No, I did a deep dive into Tolkien when I was in middle school, into Middle Earth and everything. But
yeah, the thing is, it's not like his writing is the pinnacle of writing. He was an okay author. He might have even been great for his time. But the thing is, the world progresses, and we have been able to build off of what the Lord of the Rings brought to the world, and made many more interesting stories and mythologies. People have expanded on this. People have made side stories. People have made like fan fiction.
True.
Other writings have been inspired by that and have made much better stories. And so there's no reason to restrict yourself to only things that are specifically named in this book series, right, or these 2 books, honestly. Because I wouldn't even call the Silmarillion a book as much as it's a compilation of
unfinished stories. Ideas. Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, that's true.
And nowhere in that does it say that, oh no, the dwarves cannot have a skin color past eggshell because they will burst into flames.
You're absolutely right. And that was, I made a TikTok about that where I basically summarized. This was first when the Rings of Power was first announced, and some of the first like character photos came out, and people were bitching online. And I said, "Look, first off, nowhere, I've read everything's Tolkien's put out like a nerd, and nowhere does it say everyone's white. And even if it did, why not make it better? Because it's fucking 2022." So I said, either way, you're wrong. Whether you're a purist or just a racist or whatever, you're wrong either way. But where was I going with that? No, that's pretty much it. Yeah, I mean, again, I like how they did it in House of Dragons, which has been pretty good so far. The first 2 episodes of that, where like one of the main characters who's from a house from old Valyria just happens to be a black guy. They don't make a big deal of it. They're just like, yep, cool. He's also from old Valyria, and he's one of the guys at the king's table. Like, and they just, yeah. And I was like, great, that's awesome. Like, more of that, please.
Yeah.
That's great.
Talking about like adding diversity in and actually making a story better. Yes. I will say, and a lot of people are going to disagree with me. The Song of Ice and Fire, way better than Lord of the Rings.
I think a lot of people would agree with you.
And honestly,
I don't, but I think a lot of people would agree with you.
It makes perfect sense because the Song of Ice and Fire definitely heavily influenced by Lord of the Rings.
Oh yeah, J.R.R. Martin said that in interviews. Yeah.
George R.R. Martin has definitely, like, he has been inspired by what Tolkien had given us, even as Epic Rap Battles pointed out, stole his RR in the middle.
He did, yes.
And
it was an homage. It was an homage.
Yeah, but like, there's a saying, good artists copy, great artists steal, and like there is no doubt that George R.R. Martin stole like a ton from Tolkien, but Tolkien stole a ton from
Norse mythology, Beowulf specifically.
Yeah. And like, this is a good thing because a lot of that groundwork that Tolkien laid is getting used to make better content than what anything Tolkien could have produced.
Hey, really quick, Will, not to cut you. Your video is kind of cutting in and out in a weird way, like I've never seen on Zoom before.
Must be. I think I'm getting abducted by aliens or
something. Oh no!
Let me try that again.
Getting DDoSed for your opinions on Tolkien.
What was that, Nathan?
I was saying he's getting DDoSed for his opinions on Tolkien. You haven't even gone live yet, and he's already pissed off all the nerds.
Right.
Yeah, they're just, I feel a disturbance in the force.
Right.
We have to stop this before it can even get
We're going to get a lot of hate views. It's going to be great on our podcast.
Yeah.
Well, Nathan, while Will's fixing his tech issues real quick, what's your thoughts on all this, man?
So my thoughts are kind of,
you're good now, Will.
I've always been more of the military sci-fi nerd, not Tolkien, but I've always been more into Star Wars or Halo or stuff like that, military related.
Yeah.
Anyway, so my thoughts on it are, a lot of the really, really badass characters in the universe that I've followed, for Halo nerds, Sergeant Major Johnson or Lieutenant Commander Keyes, or Commander Keyes, I guess, from Halo. They're two friggin' awesome characters, and Sergeant Major Johnson is black, and Commander Keyes is a female. And then as you progress into Halo 4 and 5, or like for me, I dove well deep and truly into Halo. I read all the books too, growing up. And it talks about Master Chief's squad that he grew up with. And basically the same squad you see in Halo 5 and They're basically the traitor squad in Halo 5 for those that
Right.
maybe
That goes
haven't
against
played.
like UNSC command. I remember. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So in that squad, the best shot that they have isn't Master Chief, but it's Linda. And there's a spot in one of the books where they've infiltrated a Covenant site, and she shot a what's the dealio? An elite in a Banshee through a view hole like probably that big from over like more than a mile away. Basically an impossible shot for anybody. And she pulled it off one shot, no questions.
That's awesome, dude.
And
Well, I think the point you're working up towards, correct me if I'm wrong, is that like a good character that pulls in the audience and makes you root for them can be anyone or look like anything. And I think that's I think that's like for me when I write like screenplays, you know, technically in screenplay format, when you first introduce a character, you write like their age, their physical description, and you're supposed to put their ethnicity. I don't do that because I'm like, look, I'm going to write how the character acts, how they relate to the world around them. And if we find someone to play that character who embodies those values, I don't give a fuck what they look like, as long as they, you know, fit the mannerisms and the spirit of that character. So,
right.
And I think that just goes to show that, thankfully, I mean, I wish it was happening quicker, but finally, like mainstream media is getting better at that. Like, they're just getting better about, okay, we're not going to like hit certain target number. We're just going to like put casting calls out for anyone. And if you play the character well, you're on board, and it's just good and natural and organic, you know?
Yeah. And
Right.
I think, yeah, and I think that's absolutely what you're, or a really important thing to get at, because sometimes if it doesn't matter, it like who the fuck cares? But there are some times where you can actually add more depth to a specific character by changing one of those factors. Like, sure, it might be absolutely meaningless to have like your, and not to get too tropey on this, but to have your like big bruiser character having that as like a big like buff man like Arnold Schwarzenegger or something.
Yep.
But then if you suddenly want that big bruiser and have it a female, suddenly like that's an entirely different character trope that it's playing at. And it gives you a lot of different information about the character and can be a lot deeper
True.
than what you're getting at before.
Because we've seen the other version a million times already. So it's doing something different, which is important. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think even among like generic white male characters, like Die Hard is a great example of this, because when Die Hard came out, we had dozens of movies that had like that action man with the like
yeah,
six pack and huge muscles, just like one man armying this shit. And then you have John McClane, who like is a guy.
Yeah.
And that ended up being a huge and important piece of that story that kind of got forgotten in later Die Hard movies, that like this is just like your average Joe. And like
he's a cop, so he's a little more tactically sensible than the average person, but he's not invincible, he's not infallible. He's a dude. I agree completely.
He had like a dad bod.
Yeah.
And that told a totally different story. And it's the same thing like if you have where if you have a character who you can kind of turn a trope on its head by casting them differently, why wouldn't you?
Exactly.
Your job is to tell a story, and you have a free storytelling element that you can take, why wouldn't you take that? And I think Game of Thrones did a great job of that by having like specific characters from specific regions, and then when you can tell a lot about a person by having somebody of a different race or different color come out to play a specific character, and then you see that visually on the screen of this tells you a lot more information about that character than you're even thinking, because this has already been set up in the world. And I really hope that they end up doing that with the Lord of the Rings here, because I think that could be really interesting. Like if we see a different group of elves with different skin tones, and you can use that as shorthand so that you can see of, oh, these elves are from this part of the woods, or even if like, oh, this is a different elf tribe than we're used to seeing, or we're getting different information from a different place. And I think that could be really effective. But
I would actually disagree, and here's why. I think
okay.
I would rather just see full diver. And again, this is total Tolkien nerd lore nonsense, but the elves all came from like one little valley, and so I would like to see just an initial mixture of all different looks and colors in the elves, because the elven migration, they go from I'm trying to remember the place that they came from, where the Valar found them, and then they brought them all to Valar and they grew there, and then a bunch migrated to Middle Earth, and there was a war with Morgoth and all that. And so I'd rather just just see them evenly mixed amongst. Now in Game of Thrones, though, I agree with you, because like you said, in that world, they've established that there are different regions, and like it makes sense in the show, like people in Dorne, it's south, it's closer to the equator.
Right.
People there tend to have darker skin, just as it is in our world, where, again, before modernization, because, nowadays, you really can't tell. Making the assumption of where someone's from based on how they look is lunacy. I mean, you can tell where their ancestors are from based on their proximity to the equator. Sometimes, exactly. And so, in the world of Game of Thrones, you can use that as a storytelling shorthand. But I would say in like Lord of the Rings, because it has such a different cultural background and stuff, I'd rather just see just a full diverse mixture,
And that is interesting, because I had forgotten all about that from the Lord of the Rings, which
again, why would you care? Because it's not your favorite. So
not my thing. I've forgotten more about Lord of the Rings than I currently know. I'm not surprised I forgot about that. But like that makes me think of, actually, there's a game, Horizon Zero Dawn, that I don't know.
Horizon Zero Dawn?
Yeah. Have either of you played that?
I've heard of it and I haven't played it.
It's a fantastic.
I've heard of it.
I will avoid any type of major spoilers, but I will like just kind of a minor thing, because it's extremely relevant to the conversation here. I hope you don't mind.
No, please go for it.
And so in the game, like you start off in a specific area, and you notice like it's very obvious immediately that this is a incredibly diverse cast of people, and it's almost kind of jarring when you see it, because you see all of the, like, a bunch of different races that are all represented, and very well, because like they used a lot of facial capture for when they were animating the game. And so you can really see the diversity of this little village that you're in.
That's cool.
And it's almost like it's almost disorienting to see that as like we normally see this type of fantasy represented. And then you find out why everything is like that. There is a very important reason why not only this city, but everywhere you go in the game is extremely diverse, and you see a mixture of races and genders and styles and all of this. in the different places. And like all of these, each city has its own culture, but the racial diversity is like very noticeable no matter where you go.
That's awesome.
And they end up using that as a plot point later on in the game. Of you find out like how that ended up becoming this diverse cast in the actual game. And the talent that they actually got for the game really is what kind of determined what the characters look like, of like who is playing what character in the game, and then their face ended up being the face of the character.
Nice.
And so you do even end up recognizing a couple of the
certain actors, you're like, oh, that's so and so. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Nice.
Yeah. And like the use of that for the actual storytelling was so effective. And I think that what you're getting at with the elves is like you could do that exact same thing, where you could show this history with the elves of coming from a different world where all of the different elf tribes have already combined. And we do even see a little bit of that where, and it might kind of go against, this is what I was initially thinking, is like in the actual movies, we've seen the two tribes of elves. I think it's two tribes of elves, the one with Elrond and then the one that Legolas came from.
Where the elves of Mirkwood.
Yeah,
they're not different tribes per se. They're just like the elves that lingered in Middle Earth. Again, I'm getting super nerdy on this. The elves that lingered in Middle Earth after the Second Age kind of ended up consolidating between like I think it's Lindon on the west coast, and then there's Rivendell, Mirkwood, and Lothlorien. And so those are each kind of their own kingdoms where everyone's kind of separated that way. But like most of the kings and queens of those are all like cousins that go back all the way thousands of years ago to like the first age of Middle Earth. Like Elrond and Galadriel are cousins, I believe, or second cousins. Yeah.
I only remember the elves by the black-haired elves and the blonde elves. Because that's how they're portrayed in the movies. But and I mean that's one way to do it, but like, and that tells one specific story, but you can easily turn that on its head and tell a different story by having that diversity there. Same thing with the dwarves. When you have different civilizations, if you're going to try to make the argument of like, well, these areas should all be homogenous with each other, that's fine. Not all of them have to be white. Not all of them have to look a specific way just because we're stealing from a specific very narrow region's mythologies. Right. And even if you're looking at it from a historical standpoint, when you look at Norse mythology, talk about fucking diversity. You have frost giants, you have the Eisner, you have the Vanir, you have the different creatures that live in Helheim. You have all kinds. What's that?
Fenrir.
Yeah, like Fenrir is a fucking dog that is the son of Loki because Loki decided to fuck a. All right, shouldn't be cussing.
We can cuss on the podcast.
All right, hashtag not sponsored.
We're not popular enough to be sponsored yet. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, but no, I was gonna say that he got drunk and had sex with a horse, but no, that was
and produced a dog.
No, that
was Sleipnir.
Yeah, that's Sleipnir. I'm thinking of he got drunk and turned into a female horse, if I remember, and then gave birth to Sleipnir.
Yeah.
That's fun.
I mean, there's transgenderism in Norse mythology. Yeah. Talk about like the LGBTQ agenda going all the way back to the 11th century.
Yeah.
But there's no reason that we can't expand the stories. And in fact, like when you look at a lot of early mythologies, that was kind of the point of the story. Of if you look at like Jewish tradition of whole different mythology, but they would consider a piece of literature dead when you could no longer interpret it in new ways.
Huh. Interesting.
And that's not only specific to Jewish mythology. You see the evolution of like the Egyptian mythology over the various dynasties. We see the evolution of Greek mythologies all the way from Mycenaean Greek up until the really the fall of the, I don't want to call it the Greek Empire because they were never really an empire, but really through kind of the loss of the worshiping of like the Hellenistic religions, and then into the rise of the Roman religion up through Constantine, where you have these stories and they're just evolving and changing over time to reflect whatever story the modern audience at the time had wanted to reflect on that, and they would get added to and change. Characters would get added or dropped from the different pantheons,
or kept but just altered, right?
Yeah. Like Dionysus went from being like a fat god of drinking to the young and sprightly, almost like chaos almost overtook the drinking and partying in some of the later representations of him, or some of the later stories that we see of the character. And so like it's the same thing with what we can find with Norse mythology, because a lot of what we had and what we have now and what Tolkien would have had when he was writing had been rewritten and changed over the years. And so there's no,
I mean, like the Bible? No, just kidding. Well,
no, exactly like the Bible. In fact, the Bible is a great example because a lot of the records that we have about Norse mythology were influenced by the Bible, because it was later authors that were trying to use the stories as a method of unification around a base culture for political reasons, and tried to relate those stories to Christianity. So that's why we end up seeing a lot of Christian influence on some of the stories that we find that were written down later on.
That makes sense.
And Tolkien would have had been influenced the same way. And so Tolkien was telling a story of a story of a story of a story. So it doesn't make any sense to say that there is one right version of this, even if like what the show is doing is contradicting Tolkien. I don't see anything wrong with that, because what Tolkien was writing about the dwarves and elves might be contradicting hundreds of variations that came before what he was writing.
Exactly.
So on and so forth. And like they're also like, Norse mythology is not the only one to reference giants or dwarves or elves or any type of these of magical beings. We see dozens of different traditions that share in similar or different versions of similar stories, from not just from like the Northern Europe, but even if you go through like and of course I almost just reference another Northern European country, but if you look at other things from like Celtic mythology, other types of Scandinavian folklores, Germanic folklores that have similar roots and mention similar creatures that are from different regions, and they all had different takes on these various like little folk or elves, fairies,
Did you have genies from
Fae.
Middle Eastern mythology?
Yeah,
You
which
got
is
the Fae.
The Fae,
Yeah.
yeah.
the Fae is a whole different thing, especially nowadays, because you have different new age cults that are kind of adopting some of these terms and beliefs and rewriting them to fit their own narrative. And we see that a lot in Wicca with taking like the triple goddess, who that title has been used for either Hecate in Greek mythology, the Morrigan. I'm totally spacing on. I had other examples in my mind, but now I'm just they're just out of my head. And that's the thing, is like ultimately all this shit's made up.
Exactly.
Like it's all fiction, and
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if like who plays what, if they're gonna do a good job at it.
Exactly.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
But no, that's exactly the point. And like, yeah, no, I mean, I don't know how to expand on that further. You hit the nail on the head. That's all it is. This is storytelling, and if you do it well, I mean, there's no reason to add extra constraints or stupid shit like that. It's just there's good storytelling and there's not good storytelling, and
It
that's
kind of reminds me, like, do you remember before the first Thor movie came out, when everybody was like getting pissed off that they cast Idris Elba as Heimdall?
I don't remember that, but I figured, because I figured that's a change from the comics, and
Yeah,
Idris Elba knocked it out of the fucking park. Heimdall's one of the coolest characters in the MCU.
Heimdall was the best part of the first Thor movie.
Yes.
And like he was the best part of any scene he was in through all the way through Endgame.
Yes, I agree.
Hell,
I was pissed in Endgame when he died. Spoiler alert to those who haven't seen Avengers Endgame.
In fact, have you seen the wait, was it Endgame that he died? But not important. Which movie he dies in?
It was no, it was Infinity War. I'm sorry.
It was Infinity War. Yeah. Have you seen Love and Thunder?
Yeah, I like that he was at the end in Valhalla. That was cool.
In fact, like he was the best part of that scene.
Yeah, that was great.
There were two characters in that scene. It wasn't there wasn't a ton of competition there.
Right. But no, that was
like and having his son in that movie.
Yeah, that was cool.
Like, and interestingly, that casting choice of having Idris Elba as a black man playing Heimdall, like you didn't know for sure at first whose son, and I totally forgot who the name of the kid in the
I don't
movie.
remember either. Yeah, I don't remember the character's name, but
who his character is supposed to be.
But when you see his power, you're like, that must be Heimdall's son, because he has the all-seeing eyes.
Yeah, and like, sure, he's. You could say that him being black might have been shorthand for him being Heimdall's son, because he was one of the few black Asgardians that we see. But the fact that you don't know that immediately, because we've seen other after the first Thor movie, we have seen other Asgardians who had different races, and then like having that kind of comeback of like him having that power and him picking up that torch. It kind of I've totally lost the plot here. But
I was like, where are you going with this, Will?
I was trying to save it, but I got lost in my thoughts there. Yeah, it's not important.
Cool.
The fact is, though, like he was great in every scene that he is in, and it's not because he's black. It's because you cast Idris Elba, who is this ridiculously talented actor who
That man
should be in
oozes
every
charisma.
movie.
My goodness.
Yes, like he should be in every movie because he is fantastic in everything he is in. And he makes every movie that he is in better simply by being there.
Yeah.
And
Well, and
that
again,
is
it kind of
something.
circles back to what we said, where if you're writing your characters to look a certain way, you're just limiting yourself to the pool of talented actors who exist.
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, in real life on Earth, for a long time, in a lot of societies, the way you look, something you have no control over, has determined how other people treat you. So, like when you're telling stories that are taking place in a realistic setting in the past, if it's like a true story, then it does matter to a certain extent that the people you're casting for characters look a certain way, because unfortunately, ethnicity played a part in how that person related to the world around them. But for anything set in modern day or future or fantasy, it shouldn't matter at all. That's why, like, one of my favorite shows is The Expanse, and that's a really diverse show because it makes sense in the storyline where it's like, hey, once humanity got the technology to start colonizing the solar system, fucking everybody went. So like every space station is super diverse, every colony outside of Earth. So if it wasn't diverse, like a lot of past sci-fi has been, now I'm like, after The Expanse, I'm like, yeah, it's weird that all those sci-fis aren't diverse. Like, what, you think America's the only people going to space? And again, in America, America's diverse too, so it's ridiculous, you know.
And America is extremely diverse, and it also it's interesting that you mentioned that being like in the past, because it does depend on how far back into the past you go, because there have been several empires that were very diverse, like the Persians, or later the Greeks that were under Alexander, where both would take the strongest parts of the people that they conquered and integrate those into the forces. And so then you end up with these very diverse armies that end up being all the better for the diversity, because then you're bringing different tactics and different weapons and different armors in, and you have a very powerful force that is were at the time the strongest armies in the region.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what it all boils down to, is that the coolest thing about humans is that we're so diverse. There's so many great aspects to culture and problem solving that come from diversity, but then also we're all very similar. Like every person at the core is the same. We all want to be loved. We all want to be safe. We all want to be accepted. We all want fulfilling lives. Like, it's just crazy to me that there are insular communities where they're like, no, I don't think so. That person looks different than me. They must not be as much of a person as I am. Like, that just blows my mind that people can walk around the real world and not understand that fact of, hey, diversity is beautiful. I love it. But at the end of the day, at the core, we're all the same. Like, how is that hard of a concept to wrap your head around? So I don't know. I don't get it.
Well, I think part of that is there is that expression of when you're used to privilege, equality feels like oppression.
Interesting. Well, I've never heard that before.
Like, and we have seen pushback in theatrical like casting a lot of times from different cultures, because this happened in Japan and in Europe, where in theater only men were allowed to be actors. And I think the similar thing in Rome, if I remember right, where, and this has come up multiple times, where you limit who can be in a specific field, and then eventually when you do start allowing diversity, you start seeing a much better product, because you end up getting people who have different backgrounds, who have different experiences,
different perspectives.
And the perspectives are probably even the most important thing. So thank you for mentioning that, because like when you're used to looking at something from one way, and then you get somebody who can bring an entirely different perspective on there, then you get to look at the same thing that you're used to with fresh eyes.
Exactly.
And like, as a visual artist, having fresh eyes to see something, you then start seeing all of the mistakes that you've been making this entire time,
or all the possibilities of things you could be doing in the future.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, and I think that, I mean, like, if everyone looked just like me and perceived the world the way I did, it'd be fucking boring. That'd be lame, you know? So.
Yeah.
I think this has been a good discussion, man. We've covered a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
I texted Gary. He got busy with some Comic-Con prep stuff, so he won't be joining us tonight. He ran late.
Nathan?
So yeah, what's up, Nathan?
So I've been kind of having this thought the last couple minutes while I've been listening, and like I said earlier, a lot of my nerd history was military sci-fi.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And growing up, one of my all-time favorite shows was Stargate SG-1.
Nice. I've heard it's a good show. I've never seen it.
It's a fantastic show. And what I like most about it is basically the commander of SG-1 is an old white guy. Like, he's not in the prime of his life. He's an older guy.
Yeah.
And then there's the nerd of the group, who, is a nerd. He sneezes all the time. He's like your stereotypical nerd.
Ah, yes.
And then
What's that like?
There's and then there's there's a female on the group, and she's not really stunning, but she's really pretty, but she's not like blows somebody out of the water beautiful, but she's also extremely smart and extremely driven, to the point where she climbs in the series of 10 years on the show, and talk about her history before she joined this GC. She 15s for the Air Force.
Did you say she flew F-15s for the Air Force? You're kind of cutting out.
I might be going through a slight dead spot. I'm like right in between. I hope I don't cut out.
Yeah, we're kind of losing you, Nathan. Sorry. When did SG-1 run? Wasn't that like early 90s into early 2000s?
Yeah, I feel like that was, I think.
Oh, go ahead, Nathan.
97 to 2006.
Oh, that's much later than I thought. I thought it was like 90, 91 that it started.
Yeah, I was thinking I was like 4, but
there's a movie that is based off of that. I think the movie dropped in 89 or 90.
Wait, I thought Stargate was 86. The one with what's his name? Kurt Russell. Yeah.
No,
well, now I gotta look it up. I'll look it up real quick.
Yeah.
I think SG-1 was like a continuation of the original Stargate, right?
Yeah.
Nathan's right. The Stargate SG-1 is 1997. Stargate, was 1994. That's much later than I thought.
Yeah.
Stargate was 94.
After that, it was Stargate Atlantis, right?
Yes, that Stargate Atlantis was 2004.
Yeah, I think Jason Momoa was in that one.
That was actually.
He was. Yeah, he was in Stargate Atlantis.
Jason Momoa's big break.
Nice.
He was Ronan Dex.
Nice.
That's getting into my nerdiness. My nerdy area was always SG-1 or Halo or anyway. But yeah, so the female, her name is Samantha Carter, and she joined the SPC as a captain, and and they kind of hint at her service history before she joined the SDC. They said that she flew F-15s for the Air Force.
Nice.
During the first Gulf War.
Okay.
And then this woman is so driven that she climbs from the captain, and she climbs up the ranks for.
Oh, cliffhanger. We never know where she makes it in her career. Oh no.
I think that is like, especially with the military, like shooter type situations, like when you do add a woman into the cast there, like you do already have a lot of information about that character, just because like with general military history, it's usually very difficult for women to be in that environment. So like with SG1, and I'm speculating on where he's going with this. But
Nathan
yeah,
is frozen like this.
Yeah, to have somebody at the like on the upper echelon of the military like that, being a woman, like that is shorthand for like she's already had to overcome all of this different things that a male in her exact same role wouldn't have had to deal with.
Yeah, same with like law enforcement characters that are
Yeah.
female. I agree completely. Yeah.
And that can be extremely useful to add that diversity in there, because then when you do have the when different things do come up, you have a character who has been through some shit.
Yeah.
And like there's a lot of people that end up in end up rising through all sorts of ranks, no matter what organization is, that probably shouldn't be there, just because they were allowed to either fail upward, or they just got there from being the right person at the right time in the right place, who or belonging to the right family.
Yeah. So when you show
have,
someone by contrast who's like fucking earned it and then some, it says a lot about the character. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of unfortunate, but in a way, it's like I said, storytelling is storytelling. And in modern, when you have an American project like that, here in the US, like the oppression of anybody who is not a semi-attractive white male ends up being pretty widely accepted as being just less deserving of specific roles historically. And so when you see somebody who doesn't fit that mold getting to that, that means that they had to overcome those type of obstacles, and they had to be up at that top of their in order to reach those upper echelons. They had to be the top of their class, top of their squadron. They had to overcome tougher physical challenges, as well as different social implications to be able to actually get there.
Yeah.
And that can be extremely valuable when you only have like 20 what is it,
28 minutes for an episode. Oh yeah, a certain number of episodes, or a certain number of minutes per episode.
Yeah.
No, I agree, but I also look forward to the day when those shorthands for oppression are no longer relevant, because that'll be a good thing for human society.
No, I definitely agree. And I think that when we're able to, like, when we are able to kind of just ignore that, that will tell us a lot more about our society than it does about any particular book.
Agreed. Well, I think that's a great note to end it on, man. I think we've discussed this thoroughly, and Nathan's, well, we'll bring Nathan back on just to do our goodbye for the podcast. So, but yeah. Hey, Nathan. Oh, he's coming back on. Well, to everyone who listened, thank you so much. Let us know in the comments what you think. We'd love to hear your perspectives. Be sure to like and subscribe for future episodes. If we actually start getting Patreon followers, we'll actually put stuff on there. But we do have a Patreon. The link will be in the podcast description. And Nathan, you there for the sign off?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm sorry about that.
Dude, you're good. No, it happens. You're no worries. We're just finishing up, so we're just saying adios to our groups or to our audience, to our groups. Anyway, thank you for listening to Nerds and Friends, everyone. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Nathan. This was awesome.
Thank you.
See you guys.